Well, joining us on this edition of the News Review, we have our correspondent, Said Purazos, joining us from London. Also, we have Professor of Economics Rodney Shakespeare, who's joining us also from the British capital. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with our correspondent, Said, in London. Said, what do these numbers mean and how alarming are they?
Well, the temperatures have cooled here, Bardia, but the inflation, as you say, is only heating up, hitting the double digits in more than 4 decades. And it is a worrying figure, considering the pace at which it is happening, that is really proving the Bank of England wrong, not for the first time. They have predicted, of course, that it's going to go beyond the 13% mark in October, but given all these differences between their predictions and the actual inflation rate, you could expect that the inflation rate will be higher come October or in the latter part of this year. And the people who are going to be feeling the most of this squeeze will be people on the lowest end of the income bracket here in the United Kingdom. But you can look at a few reasons why we've gotten here. Of course, there's the pandemic, the impact of which continues to be felt to this day, and then the issue of Brexit that is not completely done, and the negative impact that Brexit has had since day one continue to be felt today, something that you don't hear talked about in the mainstream. As an example, the shortages in the job market, lots of vacancies, but not many people to take up those jobs, and those who do show up in interviews are asking for higher wages. And this is a time where the government is asking businesses to not increase people's wages to control inflation. HGV drivers, all these things, an impact of Brexit and the influx of European workers who used to be working in the UK. And then you have the most going war in Ukraine. Yes, there have been shipments of grain with Turkish mediation out of Ukraine that might have had an impact on food, but it takes at least, economists say, 6 months for that impact in lower grain prices or raw material prices for food to be felt on the shelf edge. The inflation rate continue to go up in the next months and be significantly high, as the Bank of England has predicted, in 2023. And then you have energy prices also having gone up as a result of the war, the impact of which being felt by the people here in the UK. And all of this, as I say, happening at a time when wages are not increasing, a 3% decrease in real wages in the UK, people not being able to afford things. And so what we're very difficult winter for people who are facing the prospects of astronomical electricity bills or energy bills. Add to that fuel prices also have sent the cost of transportation up, the transportation of goods and food material coming in from the rest of the world. And as a result of all of this, we have also been seeing public sector strikes. For example, the rail workers having striked a number of times, more strikes coming up in the coming days, which we will be covering for sure. All of those things put together, Bardia, and it's going to be a very tough winter for people who are not earning much, who don't have disposable incomes to be able to weather this storm that is coming in their way.
Rodney Shakespeare, I want to get your thoughts on the issue, and what do you believe are the main underlying causes for this inflation?
A few months ago, the government said, and welcomed, it said 2% inflation, which would be transitory, which means it would soon pass away. It is now on the Bank of England's statement 13%. But if you look at the way the inflation hits on items, for ordinary people, or particularly the poorer people, the inflation is in practice around about 20%. So you then have to say, well, what is the difference between then and now? And the answer is the war in Ukraine. And you will say, well, is the war in Ukraine going to come to an end? And the answer is no, not if the UK government can help it. You see, Western foreign policy is involved in another debacle. And whereas Iraq is over, but all the consequences go on, Libya is over, but the consequences go on, the genocide in Yemen is over, well, it's not over, the consequences go on. There's a very big one, which by golly, they intend going on, because their intent is to try to weaken and overthrow the regime in Russia. Starting 25 years ago, the policy of the eastward movement of NATO has gone on and on. So you have a situation where the big factor is now the war in Ukraine, and they do not intend ending it. So I cannot give any hope to our viewers the situation is going to improve. They are going to have to rise up politically, or their lives are going to be wrecked. People are going to rise up politically. Government after government is going to fall as a consequence of this inflation, which essentially is a result of the war in Ukraine and the eastward expansion of NATO. Oh, and just before Russia's invasion, President Zelensky of Ukraine was saying, we're going into NATO and we will have atomic bombs on our soil.
Rodney Shakespeare, I'm going to stay with you. Whoever wins the race for Prime Minister in September will have a whole lot to deal with, from rising food prices to energy shortages to the stagflation and etc. Labour's been criticizing the Tories, saying this is a result of 12 years of their government. Is this only a settling of political scores, in your opinion, or is the Tory leadership really responsible for failing to prepare for this day?
Well, ongoing incompetence is certainly a factor. But the big factor at the moment is the debacle after debacle after debacle of Western foreign policy. I mean, it was only a year ago that there was the horror of the end of Afghanistan. And the Labour Party in this country is involved in the latest debacle as much as the Conservatives are. None of them will say what is the only way of solving it, because their policy is based on lies. The reality is that Russia has moved into Ukraine to take over the Russian-speaking sections of Ukraine, which were being destroyed by artillery fire. 14,000 Russian-speaking Ukrainians were killed before the invasion started. That's not a joke. And Labour is involved in this. And Labour is spouting the propaganda that Ukraine is a democracy. No, it's not. All the opposition parties have been abolished. The press is completely eliminated. There's nothing except a group of corrupt. Ukraine's one of the most corrupt countries in the world. The reality is, it is going to be cut roughly in half. And in the east and along the south, and Russia will be going to Odessa. But if the West wants to continue this, Russia will in fact be forced to go even further into Ukraine. So either the West wakes up to this, but it's not going to. Their policy is they want war to go on, and they don't mind how many hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers died. They do not care. They should accept the reality, which is that Russia is there and is going to move into the Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine, and they should then say, and we will remove the sanctions on Russia. Uh, what I'm saying now is going to be said in a few months' time, but at the moment it's the great elephant in the room, which everybody is trying to ignore.
Saeed, the Bank of England has predicted a recession to hit at the end of the year. Now, whoever wins the race for Prime Minister, when the new Prime Minister basically comes, that's Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak, who've laid out their plans for the economy, for the energy crisis. When that new Prime Minister comes, will there be enough time to avert this looming recession or not?
It's a very tough question, Bardia. The fact is that these two prime ministerial hopefuls have been trashing each other's records since in all their televised debates so far. With one, the incumbent foreign secretary, Liz Truss, offering tax cuts to help people with their bills and their cost of living in the coming months, and with Rishi Sunak saying, look, it's a fact, we have to accept it, and he's going to focus only on the inflation rate before anything else if he is elected. But as we know, this is all aimed at pandering to the very small minority of the British public, some 190,000 members of the Conservative Party who will select the next Prime Minister of this country. Whether or not Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss will be able to avert a recession will be only a matter of time. We'll have to see which of these two people will be selected as next Prime Minister. The incumbent, resigned Prime Minister, has spent most of his time on holiday since he stepped down. But as we know, Rishi Sunak, well, he's the Chancellor. He has experience in this regard, as opposed to Liz Truss, who does not have or share that experience. But then we have to remind ourselves that part of why the UK is in the situation it is now is it happened on his watch. Rishi Sunak as Chancellor, he received a lot of praise over the furlough scheme and a few other things that he did during the pandemic. But then again, perhaps he could have done more to avert the situation the country is in. But moving forward, I think we'll just have to wait and see whether or not they will be actually able to deliver on the promises they're making now.
All right, thanks a lot, gentlemen. Press TV's Ariel and Saeed Pudas are joining us from London. Also joining us from the British capital, Professor of Economics Rodney Shakespeare. With that, it brings us to an end here on this edition of the News Review. But do stay tuned. There's plenty more to come here on Press TV. See you in a bit.